So everybody, welcome to this year's webinar for our 2022 Corporate Alumni Benchmarking Report. Ignore the fact that it says 2021 on the slide right there. I thought we'd fix that, but your eyes are not playing tricks. It has not gone back a year. So I'm very excited to work with Dr. Rebecca Paluch here, who will largely be driving the webinar today. I am Jenn Pedde, the Vice President of Customer Advocacy for PeoplePath. I work with our clients, both internally and externally, on their strategic programs and best practices, and working with Becky throughout the year here to create excellent benchmarking statistics for everyone to use and grow with. And I'll let Becky introduce herself here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Becky Paluch. I'm an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, and I've been working with Jenn and the PeoplePath team now for a few years. And I'm really excited to be here today to go through the findings from the 2022 benchmarking report.
Great. So many of you know, but maybe some of you are new. And so I just want to take a second to go over PeoplePath. PeoplePath believes in lifelong relationships and that they are the foundation for mutual success. So we work with our clients as trusted partners. We build the platform and enable you to use it, but we try to do our best to help you in every way possible, both with a technological platform and with any creative ideas or strategy that you might need. So moving on to a little bit more about the company. So we are spread throughout the world. We have offices in Seattle, New York, Munich, Pilsen, and we cover as many times as that covers. We have clients in all major sectors. We have just an array of experience through everyone who's worked in the world of alumni for around, upwards of 20 years in some cases. So we are very excited to continue talking about this and bring you some interesting insights today. And if we go on to the next slide, I just want to take a short, brief pause here to mention that we're actually getting everyone back in person this year. So if you haven't heard yet, we are going to be in New York in September as well as London. And so we are very excited to offer a workshop in New York at Bain & Company. They're so kindly offering their workspace to us. We'll be doing a workshop there. And then in London, we're going to have a panel event, and we're about to announce the speakers pretty soon. So you can join us for either or both if you feel like traveling, and both events are free. So please do sign up on our website under the news and events page. So with that, very excited to let Becky take it over and start talking about all the data that we saw this year.
Thanks, Jenn. As I mentioned, I'm really excited to be here. This was a really fun year to look at some of the data and the changes that are happening with alumni programs. Of course, we can't ignore the fact of why some of this has been so interesting over the past few years. I'm sure I don't have to sell it to you all. You might even be sick of hearing about the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle or the Great Rethink or whatever term that we're using currently today. Basically, to sum it up, there has been a ton of movement, a lot of volatility in the labor market. In 2021, we saw unprecedented movement in the labor force. So over half of workers changed their jobs in 2021, according to some PEW Research. What are we thinking in terms of 2022? We're expecting the same levels of turnover and mobility in the labor force. So Gartner is expecting that turnover in 2022 is going to be 50 to 75% higher than past historical rates. So, a lot of organizations are doing some of their forecasting based off of what they've seen in the past. And we're seeing a lot of this really, it's hard to predict right now. There's higher levels than normal. And so it really just highlights the importance of having that corporate alumni program in place, because we are expecting a lot of employees to be leaving, to be moving around, and potentially even coming back. So hopefully this really helps set the stage for why corporate alumni programs are so important right now. So diving into the report and getting a little bit more focused on the data that has been collected over the past year. As we started to get our plans together for the 2022 report, we structured our survey kind of focusing on three main points. First, we really wanted to track differences from last year. I don't have to tell you all, there's been a lot of changes over the past few years. So we really wanted to see how organizations were emerging from the pandemic. So looking at differences between 2021 and what we're seeing now in 2022 and going forward. We also wanted to look, do a little bit more detailed analysis. We've traditionally done kind of aggregated data and looking at it at alumni programs as a whole. But as alumni programs are growing, we're starting to see more differences based on alumni program size. So we're going to dig into that a little bit more in this webinar. That wasn't quite as fully detailed in the report. So hopefully giving you some more information that you can use to manage your own programs. And the last goal or focus of the report was to also learn a little bit more about offboarding. One of the things that we've been finding is really important for corporate alumni programs is introducing it earlier in the employee life cycle. This is part of a larger goal to see that relationship with employees and alumni as not two separate relationships, but this ongoing relationship that just extends and evolves and flows from that employment period. It's a lifelong relationship. So let's dive into some of these facts. I'm going to do some quick overview, hopefully go through this a little bit, these surface level facts a little bit quickly, just to give you the foundations for what we'll talk about. So one of the interesting findings from this year's report was that a majority of alumni programs, about 61%, are between 3 to 15 years old. So this is a little bit higher. We're seeing programs really shifting kind of to this mature period where they're getting into their groove, they're getting into their flow compared to prior years. But what was really interesting actually this year compared to last year and reflects the broader economy is that we had a higher percentage of alumni programs that were less than 1 year old. So in 2021, as you can see, that was about 6% of the respondents were less than 1 year old, and that jumped to 13%. And this really reflects the growing recognition of alumni programs and the value that they provide to organizations. More organizations are trying to jump into this landscape of alumni programs and getting their own programs started in their organizations. We also wanted to look at some trends over time in terms of investments being made into alumni programs. So for this graph, what you're seeing is the percentage of programs with 3 or more FTEs or full-time equivalents. What was really interesting is to see this upward direction over time. 2016 was one of the first years that the benchmarking report data was collected. And at that time, about 12% of programs had 3 or more FTEs. So a lower amount of programs had a team of workers dedicated to the alumni program. As you can see, by 2022, we now see about a quarter of the programs have a team dedicated to running and managing the alumni program. So I expect that this will continue to grow. One of the other interesting points here is, we did see a little bit of a decline over the 2020-2021 period, which is to be expected considering everything that was going on with this global pandemic that you might have heard about. Similarly, in terms of actual financial investments, we are continuing to see this increase in the amount of money that organizations are dedicating to the alumni program. So in 2017, it was at about 24% of programs had a budget of $100,000 or more. Let's fast forward to 2022, 50% of the programs that responded to the survey had a budget of $100,000 or more. So we are definitely seeing more money, more resources being allocated to alumni programs as organizations really continue to see the value that these programs offer to the organization.
Becky, you bring up such good points here because we are actually seeing that with our clients as well. And for anyone here who is trying to make the case for more team members or more budget, we are happy to help you. I do have a few sample job descriptions. I do have a few ideas of how to make the case for needing more money. But largely, this is the other thing that we want to point out too, is that this money is not for headcount. The money is for typically programming of any other kind in the program itself. So it could be for events, it could be for materials, could be for a lot of things, and usually for companies that have multiple presences. So can be lower in some, but still used in great ways. And the nice thing about the last couple of years is that more events have gone virtual, which means you can do more events with your budget and make it stretch longer. So we do encourage people to think about events and using that money if they have it, but it's okay if you don't. And there's, at least half programs who have less than 100,000, so that's okay too.
Yeah, that's a really great segue into what I want to talk about next is what are alumni programs actually doing with these increased investments? How are they using it to run activities? Jen, as you mentioned, there's been an increase, of course, in virtual events, which has really helped spread the diversity of programming as we kind of had to make changes because of the pandemic, right? So just as a brief overview of some of the activities that are common within alumni programming, this is something that I've been saying for years now. It was one of the key findings from my own dissertation, actually, is the importance of really having that central technology program or platform. 83% of programs do offer a central technology platform. From the research that I've done, this is so key in having that centralized home for alumni information, alumni events, alumni training. It gives alumni a quick and easy way to access that information from your organization. Some other top alumni programming, we are starting to see some standardization in terms of what activities alumni programs are offering to their network. So these top three activities we're seeing pretty broadly across all alumni programs, the availability of company news and information, alumni stories that actually has increased quite a bit over time. So organizations that are spotlighting alumni and highlighting what they're doing currently. And then of course, networking opportunities, those happy hours, those events to bring alumni, not only alumni together, but make sure that they're still connecting with people who are still in the organization as well. So we also wanted to look at how alumni programs were communicating with alumni. Most alumni programs are contacting their alumni on either a monthly or quarterly basis. Here's where it gets a little bit more interesting in terms of how this might vary in terms of that alumni program size. So we split the data to look at smaller alumni programs versus larger alumni programs based off the numbers. The smaller programs were about 5,000 or less in the registered alumni database. Of these smaller types of alumni program, 36%, so about a third, were contacting or communicating with alumni either on a monthly basis or more frequently, so potentially even on a weekly basis. We saw quite a large jump when we're looking at these larger alumni programs. So when the alumni program has 5,000 or more registered alumni, those types of programs are communicating, of the larger alumni programs, 70% of them are communicating monthly or more frequently with their alumni. So, as the alumni network grows, there needs to be more communication, potentially because there's going to be a wider variety of needs and interests within that alumni community. So there may be more targeted communications or broader communications. But as that alumni program grows, there's likely going to be an increase in the frequency with which the program communicates with alumni. So flipping this on the head a little bit, not only are we looking at how alumni programs are reaching out to alumni, we also wanted to know how they were seeking feedback and trying to get that information coming back in from alumni. 26% of alumni programs are serving their alumni network annually. 21% are doing it every 2 years or so. So we are seeing about 50% at least serving their alumni program 1 to 2 years. Again, we saw some interesting differences based off of that alumni program size. So for these smaller alumni programs, about 43% actually did issue some type of survey to their alumni. Again, we see this increase for larger alumni programs. I think this is really critical as that alumni program is growing, to get that idea of what it is that a variety of alumni are looking for, or what they'll find value in terms of their alumni, the programming being offered. So of these larger alumni programs, 65% of these programs do survey alumni.
Becky, I don't think we studied this in the report, but we did have a question come in. Do you know what the percent of response are to surveys, or do you have any anecdotal data of just surveys in general this year?
Yeah, so we did ask that. It was about 20 to 25% do respond to the alumni surveys.
And that's on average, so.
Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
On average. I could break that out if there's interest based on the alumni program size as well. If we'll have contact information at the end, so if that's something of interest to you, please feel free to reach out.
And a reminder, I didn't say this before, but if anyone has any questions, please do feel free to drop it in the chat as we go.
Yes, please do. So moving into this next section, one of the other key focus of this data collection and the report was, as I mentioned, looking at how the alumni programming is being integrated into the employee life cycle so that we have this smooth transition from being an employee to becoming an alum. So some quick kind of overarching facts. About 60% are currently including employees in alumni programming. That has increased quite a bit over the years. Initially, there was some hesitation about, should we introduce alumni programming to employees? Is this encouraging them to leave? But as we collect more information and as we continue to see the value of alumni programming, what we're learning is that it's actually really great to advertise the alumni programming because it promotes this general sense of the organization supports you no matter where you end up. The other interesting finding here is that about 50% here are actually using the alumni programming to recruit new employees. This was really interesting to me because I actually do have some research on this, a research project looking at differences in organizations and whether they include information about alumni programming during recruitment. And it does create greater attraction to the organization, as well as greater sense of support from the organization for individuals broadly. So one of the things that we really started to look at more this year was career transition support, also known as offboarding. We did ask about this a little bit in the 2021 report, but we wanted to start to dig into this a little bit more this year. We found that 57% of the organizations were actually offering these offboarding supports before the employee leaves the organization.
Is this what you expected when you asked the question in the survey?
So actually, I was kind of surprised. This was a little bit higher than what I had expected. I know this is still kind of an emerging practice, so this was a little bit higher. It may also be because we're surveying people who already know the value of alumni, who already know what the importance of supporting people as they leave. So this may be something that is particular to our sample group. But what's really interesting, and I want to highlight because I think there's a lot of room for improvement and growth and differentiation, particularly in this offboarding practice area. So when we were looking at this, we wanted to look at the types of offboarding practices or supports that were being provided. We looked at things like career counseling, resume and cover letter support, interview training, job search administrative support, reskilling training, and online networking training. And as you can see here, none of these are a dominant practice. There doesn't seem to be this standardization of offboarding across organizations. So what I think is really interesting here, and it's something that you all might be interested in, is that this is really an area where organizations can differentiate themselves. They can provide something that is different than what other organizations are offering and make them stand out in the labor market. So what's also interesting is that as offboarding kind of grows in prominence and frequency in organizations, on the flip side, so the offboarding is prior to the employee leaving, but then we were also curious about that point of exit, that exit process. What happens when the person hands in their notice? What are those steps that are taken? And here we do see some standardization and formalization of the process. What was really interesting is that almost all organizations at this point are offering some type of formal exit interview or exit survey. And I want to pause here because this was kind of surprising to both Jen and I as we were going through these findings. And one area that we would love to look into with next year's report is what are organizations actually doing with this data? So, you know, a lot of this data is being collected. We've heard from other research that sometimes this data is collected and then never looked at, it's never acted upon. But this is a really great opportunity to start learning about what it is that people, or the reasons that people are leaving, potentially learn more about market conditions. So as I continue going through this exit process information, if you're willing to, in the chat, share some of the ways that you're using the exit interview or exit survey information. For example, are you using it to restructure HR practices? Are you looking at it for compensation to kind of judge where you are in the market in terms of compensation? Are you using it potentially for manager training? Maybe if you're seeing trends where people are leaving because of poor relationships with managers, that's something that could be implemented in terms of manager training. Is it something that's being implemented for looking at performance evaluation? We would love to hear from you, so please feel free to jump into the chat and share the ways that you use the exit interview to make changes either to the employment process or for your alumni programming as well. We're hoping to use some of your feedback to help structure next year's benchmarking survey.
Yeah, to add on to that, I mean, 90% is unusual, right? That's almost saying every one of you do this, which is incredible, but it's just such an unknown. And I do think largely it's detached in most cases from your day-to-day. So you might need to ask HR analytics or other types of operation roles within that department. I know when I managed my program, it was actually our parent company that managed all of this stuff. So finding who does the ownership of this and then how it's applied and how it's presented took some time. So if someone left in January and took a survey, then the following year is when they would actually look at the analytics. So by the time they made any kind of changes, it was a year and a half later, but they still really valued the information and it was still presented to all of HR. So even if it's just a simple, we just presented to HR and nothing else happens, it would be interesting to know that's where it ends. And then there's still some improvements we can make and some suggestions based off of what you're saying. So any insight you have on this here will help us create those questions. And the next year we'll have stronger data on it to present to your departments on how to better use this data.
Yeah, and we really want to emphasize the importance of by helping us shape these surveys that we're issuing. We're hoping to really just help you all learn more about what you can use, do to improve the use of this data, potentially use it in terms of structuring that alumni program. You may find that a lot of the early career employees are leaving, and so maybe they'll need more training or social networking opportunities to really grow their career. And so really understanding that exit interview data, we're hoping to learn more about that in the next year. The other thing that I just want to highlight with these exit activities is that we are, a majority of respondents are including information about the alumni program and are reaching out with an email to encourage them to join the alumni network. But it's still actually a little bit lower than what I was expecting, particularly because we are communicating and asking these responses from alumni program managers. I think there is room to grow. And if you're not currently doing this for exiting employees, maybe this is something that you should consider adding into the exit process.
Last year, we had mentioned some of the ideas that people could do as far as those materials. So when I had to redo our exit process, what we did was not change it operationally, because that's sometimes legal for reasons you can't change any of those documents or anything like that. But what you can do is add to it. So we added a thank you note from our CEO. Thank you for your time. We try to think of offboarding as important as onboarding, that you should leave a good lasting impression when they walk out. and into the alumni program in any way possible. So a thank you note goes a long way, or even simple helpful things like a checklist. Do you return your laptop? Did you get rid of your corporate card? Did you remember to sign up for the alumni program? All those things in one simple sheet, and then contact information. Everyone leaves and kind of forgets that you still need email addresses and phone numbers for various things. So make sure it's just all in there. So there you go. You have 3 documents that can be attached or sent physically, however you'd like to do it. But it just gives people a bit more of an orientation into being an alumni program, alumni member, and it's usually well received.
And being the researcher, I just also have to add, there's really interesting research about how that exit process can actually override sentiment from the entire employment period. So having these kind of critical points, it's really important to make sure that as that employee is leaving, they're feeling supported, because as I mentioned, they could have had a positive employment relationship during their entire employment period. And if that exit process goes downhill, if they feel like, they're just being kind of pushed out without that continuing support, it can actually override all of those positive sentiments that took years to build. So it's really important from what we're seeing in the research to make sure that exit process, that support, and that continuation of interest and contact, that it's continued to be communicated even at those critical employment points. So after the exit comes potentially, hopefully, some boomerang employment. You've now hopefully supported employees as they've been leaving. You supported them at that exit process. Now, with all of that foundation set up, you're probably thinking, okay, is there any way that I can reel them back in, particularly if there's some regrettable loss there? What was really interesting from the report this year is that we did see an increase in the percentage of boomerang hires in the new hire pool. So this year it was 8%. That was an increase from 5% from the prior year. So 8% of new hires for organizations were boomerang employees. We are seeing kind of broadly in industry that can actually hit up to 10 to 15%. Even in the data that was collected, I saw some organizations were reporting it got as high as 20%. So boomerang employees can be really valuable to your organization. Many of you had said that some of the prime value of boomerang employees is that they're faster to onboard, they're quicker to recruit because they already know more about the information, and they already have their network set up in the organization. They already know some of the core operations of the organization. So those are just some of the benefits of boomerang employees. And we do have the research that does suggest the value of rehiring former employees. So we also wanted to know, well, for these organizations that are getting higher levels of boomerang employees, what are they doing differently? How are they, bringing these employees back to the fold? And as we kind of hinted at before, it doesn't happen overnight. This is something that happens throughout that employment relationship process. So what we looked at was, organizations that fell below the average for boomerang employees and those that fell above the average. So those that had less than 8% of new hires as boomerang employees, about 43% offered that outplacement support. So remember, we were kind of setting it up saying, hey, that support is really important to get these longer term outcomes. And yes, we see that the organizations that have above average rates of boomerang employees are offering that outplacement support. They're setting those foundations, leaving that impression for departing employees that we do care about you. We want you to succeed. Maybe we want you to succeed elsewhere, but please keep us in mind in the future of coming back, because we would love to have you back as well. So, this is stuff that happens in the employment cycle, but many of you just are not part of the HR process and are focused on managing that alumni program. So we want to lay out the case for having an engaged alumni program here. So the statistician in me, I'm going to kind of bring you back to some stats analysis here. Hopefully you don't get too annoyed with me for bringing back the stats that you've kind of pushed to the back of your mind over the years. I wanted to look at some correlations here. And what the two main components that we were looking at here is that boomerang percentage, and for this first analysis, the total alumni. So we asked managers, how many alumni do you think you have in total? So this is kind of related to just average turnover numbers. How many alumni are out there in the market, in the labor market? We did find a weak positive correlation between the total number of alumni and higher percentages of boomerangs. So it's pretty logical, right? The more alumni that you have, there is likely to be an increase in boomerangs in your new hires. It makes sense. There's just a larger pool of potentials to come back for boomerang hires. However, this is a weak positive correlation. So that's a weak relationship. For those of you who do have that stats background, if it's less than 0.3, that's considered a weak positive relationship. The data we found here was 0.28. What's really interesting and what really stood out to me was the difference in when we look at number of registered alumni. So these are the people that are registered in the alumni network. They've registered on the platform. They've shared that email to continue communications after they leave. We saw a really strong positive correlation. So this is the way to interpret this is that as the number of registered alumni increases, you're likely to see greater numbers of boomerangs in your new hire pool. So to show this together, to really show this comparison here, yes, having more alumni, having more turnover will somewhat increase the percentage of boomerangs in your new hires. But what really matters here is that these alumni are registered, they're engaged, they're getting that communication, and that's really going to increase these numbers of boomerangs in the new hires. Of course, we can't, look even at boomerang percentages or some of this data unless it's being tracked. And I'll shift that responsibility over to many of you all who are managing your alumni programs. This has been a theme throughout some of the benchmarking reports. It is so important to track and measure the returns on your alumni program. You all are dedicating so much time and energy and investments into your alumni program. Let's look at the fruits of all of your labor, right? So over time, we've looked at some of these returns consistently: boomerang hires, alumni assisted sales, alumni referrals for new hires, the Net Promoter Score, and Glassdoor scores. What was really interesting to see is that across all of these data points, we saw an increase in the percentage of organizations measuring these returns. Boomerang hires increased from 57% to 61%. The largest jump was Glassdoor scores. 20% of organizations measured Glassdoor scores in 2021. In 2022, that jumped to 30%. So we are seeing more awareness of tracking and collecting this data in order to really make that business case for your alumni program. Another kind of continuation from what we looked at in 2021 was the alignment of what's being tracked versus where the alumni program manager sits within the organization. This was something that was quite surprising in 2021. There was quite a bit of misalignment in terms of the goals of a unit. So, HR measuring boomerang hires makes sense, right? It's part of that talent management process. And so we wanted to look and check back in this year to see if there might be greater alignment. And we are seeing some greater alignment here. So in terms of alumni assisted sales, about 50% of business development alumni managers or alumni managers who sit in that business development unit are tracking the alumni assisted sales. Interestingly, the marketing alumni program managers are the most likely to be tracking those alumni assisted sales. So if you're sitting in the business development unit as an alumni program manager and you're not already tracking this, this may be something to think about doing over this upcoming year. Consistently across the units, we did see higher levels of tracking these boomerang returns, the boomerang hires. I think what this says to me is that regardless of where you sit, organizations really see the value of the alumni program in terms of the talent management and bringing back valued employees. And so that was pretty consistent across the different units. Alumni new hire referrals were fairly consistent as well, just based anecdotally off of conversations that I've had with other alumni program managers. I do expect this to increase. There seems to be more interest in getting these referral programs up and running. So with that, I would expect there's going to be greater attention to tracking how many referrals come in, how many of these referrals are successful. So I do expect these numbers to increase to the level of Boomerang hires over the coming years.
And to jump in there, if anyone is considering a referral program, I do have examples and I do have some guidelines that you could follow that would make it easier for you to start one of these programs.
And hopefully if you do start it, you'll track that data afterwards, and I can include that in our benchmarking report. And then last but not least, these marketing focused outcomes here, the Net Promoter Scores and the Glassdoor scores. Interestingly, I thought these would be a little bit higher for alumni program managers sitting in the marketing unit. The marketing alumni program managers do tend to pay a little bit more attention to the alumni assisted sales and the Boomerang hires. So this may be just kind of a little bit of a nudge if you're currently sitting in the marketing unit to think a little bit more about tracking that Net Promoter Score or Glassdoor score. That could be something, particularly with Glassdoor scores, you just check in monthly or every 6 months or so to see how that's moving, and really thinking about different ways that you can incorporate the Net Promoter Scores even in your alumni communication. So, did you want to say
before? Yeah, just to kind of bring it all home, if you think about it, it's all the engagement, all the communication, all that work you're doing on a day-to-day basis. You're tracking those community health metrics that really impact those larger, broader goals. And then aligning those bigger, larger goals helps you make that story to your executives, to your sponsors, and really just keeps the program growing, and that enables you to get those full-time equivalents and the bigger budget, right? So everything here, we've kind of almost gone backwards in the way that you would build a team, but the data is really, really showing that people are aligning, that people are doing really good strategy work when it comes to engagement, and they're seeing the results overall. So it's really interesting to hear, and I'm very excited to see how this kind of changes even throughout the next year. And I think largely the Great Resignation, the big shift, whatever you want to call it, is forcing us to do this because of the quick rate of turnover. So in a way, it's good that we're right in the right time and right place for alumni programs. So
I 100% agree. And I love that you brought in this concept of the feedback loop. That's something that I think about quite a bit is, how can we use this data to feed back into getting more resources, getting more of those FTEs. All of this is connected. I know we've kind of laid it out as this continuation of process, but hopefully you're also seeing the ways that it feeds back into those earlier processes. So I have to say, none of this could be done without the support of alumni managers. So thank you to all of the alumni managers who did participate in this survey. And part of, I want to make a quick plug here that for people who participate, we do send out an exclusive respondent report with more information about the alumni manager role. So I'm going to give some of the highlights, but if you want the full report, hopefully you'll respond next year to get some of this insider information here. Just as broadly, we're seeing this continuation of a trend that the three areas that alumni program managers generally sit in are the marketing department, the human resources department, and the business development department. This has been pretty consistent over the years. If you had asked me a few years ago, I might have said that we might start to see some shift towards the alumni manager being in a particular area or particular function. But what I think is really going on here is it really depends on what the organization's goals are in terms of where that alumni program sits, and making sure that the alumni program is being used and strategized for the specific goals of the organization. Some information about the alumni manager role itself as well. Alumni managers we're continuing to see that organizations really value the expertise of alumni managers. So this year, 69% of the alumni managers earned 100,000 or more in total compensation. So that's salary plus bonuses. And so that increased from 2021. Part of that may just be this general rise in compensation, but really what I think is it's increased so much that organizations are seeing the value of people who know how to run these alumni programs, who've had experiences building the programs. And so it's really given alumni program managers a competitive edge in being able to negotiate more for themselves.
One question, Beth. Sorry, before you jump on to the next stat.
Yeah.
So the thing I want to say here is that we do have it broken down by title. So going from, maybe you're an associate or entry level through manager up through executive. So we do have that breakdown. If someone wants to email me and ask, I'm happy to provide that. But we did get a question that, do we have a regional breakdown? And I don't know if we asked about location this year, did we?
We did. So I could run that data, and that is something we could also break down. I do have to say that many of our alumni managers are in the North American region, so it may be a little bit more focused on that. But yes, I do know, I recognize the importance of geographical location as well in the compensation figures. If there's any specific questions about that, particularly, and this has happened over the course of the past year as we've started to collect this data, if something comes up and you're trying to renegotiate and you would love to have some of this information, please feel free to contact Jenn or I, and we can give you a little bit more to help you negotiate.
Yeah, and the other question that popped in here was, do you have a size of alumni program breakdown on compensation as well? So I want to be very careful about that. We do have a size breakdown of programs, but I don't think it should correlate to the alumni program salary, right?
Right.
So just because you have 100 alumni or 1,000 alumni doesn't mean you're not doing the same work. So I would be very careful about correlating those two things. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes, particularly because we do see, law firms are a large percentage of our respondents and of the organizations that offer alumni programs. And those can be a little bit smaller in terms of the alumni program size or the alumni network size, but we also see that law firms are the most likely or tend to be the most likely to value these programs. So as Jenn, as you mentioned, I don't think size is a really good indicator of the compensation that's being offered. So moving on to that next stat, we are also seeing that there's an increase in the amount of, the alumni managers. There are more alumni managers that are being dedicating their full time to alumni program management. This has increased over time, as alumni programs were starting to emerge. It was kind of seen as an offshoot of somebody's core job. But again, as alumni programs are increasing in size, as they're adding more value to organizations, we're seeing the value of having that full-time, or at least the majority, 75% or more of their professional time being allocated to the alumni program. This is also something that just as a rollover from my dissertation work, having alumni programs that have that full-time central person is really important. That's where we see kind of the higher levels of engagement, more quality programming, because that person can really dedicate full-time their attention to the alumni program.
Yeah, and I think that speaks back to the growth in team size, as well as the growth in those smaller programs that have one person. So that even though you're seeing some growth in the number of people helping on these larger programs, even the smaller ones are seeing less or fewer split roles. And so I had a split role at my last place, and it's a lot of work for one person to manage. So if you can make the case to choose one or the other, the benefit of that is for the program as well as the company and everything we've kind of showed today.
And I have to say that we did only ask to 100%. I know many of you are managing 150% of your time or more. So we did limit it to 100%, but I know many of you are juggling multiple responsibilities. So thank you for that. Without your dedication to these alumni programs, we wouldn't see this continual increase year over year. I know I've thrown quite a bit of information and data at you. Hopefully it's gotten you thinking a little bit more about where your own program stands, maybe some goals for what's ahead. And so I want to transition a little bit more into predictions about what we're seeing and where it may go in the future. It may be a little bit obvious, but we do continue to expect this labor market volatility, continuing increase in layoffs and quits. I know over the past year, it's been primarily voluntary departures, but of course, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not layoffs are coming. We're seeing this grow in the tech industry as well. So we do continue to expect to see high levels of movement, high volatility in terms of employees moving from organization to organization. This is, I'm sure HR people are thinking, this is too, it's hard to predict, but this is good news for corporate alumni programs in terms of making sure that even as people leave, they're still being engaged. The other thing that we expect to see, and one of the reasons we were focusing on this for this year's report, is the continuing integration into the employee life cycle. Anecdotally, we're seeing executives talk more about how it's important to get that alumni programming or communicate that lifelong or long-term relationship early on so that employees are expecting this even as they leave. And then finally, one of the other interesting things that we're not quite sure about, but I'm sure, you open any media outlet at this point and there's discussion about whether there's going to be a recession, whether it's already started. And so hopefully this is kind of getting you thinking about what's ahead in terms of your own programming, thinking about if we do enter this recession, how might that change your own programming? How might it change the needs of your alumni network? Potentially, there may be increases in training or mentoring programs to meet the needs of alumni if we do enter into a recession period. Jen, did you have anything you wanted to jump in here with?
I think you covered it quite well, but I do think that we are going to see a tightening of alumni programs as far as skill and strategy and engagement offerings and calendar and the way that we put together a program throughout the year, just through increased engagement and education as we continue to do this. So please do ask us any questions that relates to anything in this report at any point between now and the next time we do the survey, and we will consider adding it into the survey. We're always kind of changing those questions and changing, as much as we can without the year-to-year data changing, just so we can get a better idea of what's going on, and your insight and your willingness to talk about your role in your program is unbelievably helpful. But I do think it will completely mirror what's happening in the talent world as it happens in the next year or so. But I don't see any signs of slowing down. The weird thing is that talent is still going very strong. It's still a low unemployment rate, even though there are some weird economic things happening that typically don't align with that. Mm-hmm. And I did read recently this week, McKinsey did a report that basically said that even the voluntary quits are 20% higher now than they were pre-pandemic. So it's just a lot of built up people moving around and volatility, and the change in the way we view work. We want more flexibility. That's the number one reason anybody leaves. The burnout and bad managers are always the top 3 reasons why people leave. But I think people are just have reevaluated life, and so are always moving around. And even before the pandemic, the average time at a company was, for any age, was 4 years, 4.1 years, according to labor statistics. So we're just going to be in a great place as long as we continue to build these programs and build those relationships with our former employees.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just reiterate one of the points that you made. While we collect this data and put the reports out for, just continuing knowledge and expanding our understanding of alumni programs, at the core of it, when we have that meeting to discuss what the survey is going to look like at this year or for future years, at the core of it, we're really thinking about how can we meet the needs of alumni program managers? What is it that would help them better structure their alumni programs? What can we provide to alumni program managers in order to really help inform this strategy, of these alumni programs? So with that, I wanted to open it up for any questions or comments.
Yeah, so we actually do a few, so I can go through and definitely grab a glass of water. You've done a great job speaking so far. So just kind of going back through. So the offboarding support activities that you mentioned mirror what organizations offer when they do layoffs or asks employees to leave. So do you know if that is the case with survey respondents? And I'm not really sure, if that needs more clarification or not.
Yeah, we didn't ask whether those were only offered to the layoff employees or whether that was available for voluntary employees or voluntary departures as well. What I do anecdotally here is that because these programs are already in place, a lot of organizations are opening them up to other employees. What I've also been hearing, and maybe we should consider adding this into next year's report as well, is having that alongside internal transfer support. So rather than just kind of saying, hey, there are these external opportunities, why don't you check out our internal opportunities? And we'll look at some of the ways that we can reskill or train to help facilitate this move into other positions within the organization as well.
Great. If anyone has any other questions or any clarified questions as we go through these, please drop them in the chat. We do a few minutes to go through these. The next one that I have here is, have you seen any pushback from general HR, including alumni questions on the exit interviews? I've had conversations that HR doesn't feel it's the right time because often people are really airing their dirty laundry in the exit interview and it's not overall positive.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And I think this also shows a shift in the times. 5-10 years ago, we did see there had been more discussion about this is the time for, as this person mentioned, airing the dirty laundry. What we're actually starting to see more over the past couple of years is more productive feedback. A lot of people are not putting that just ranting kind of information into the exit interviews because of how interconnected our world is now. There may be actually some hesitation to share stuff that's too negative. So that actually raises another question. A question that we're currently looking at now is, when is the best time to get some of that exit information? Is it prior to departure? Is it that day of departure? Is it in the weeks after departure? Is it even 3 to 6 months afterwards, where there can be a little bit of cooling down of emotions? But that is something that's currently some research in progress. Hopefully we'll have some more information over the next year or so.
The hard part about doing the 3 to 6 months is you would need to have all that information and an alumni program basically to help you make sure you have all that data to contact them afterwards, which really the only thing you ever need in the exit process is the email address, right? That's the biggest thing to keep in touch. So, and a lot of programs don't do that. So it's a necessary evil sometimes to have both, you know?
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting too is the grass is greener phenomenon. People may leave unhappy, they start their new job and they realize, hey, actually, I was wrong. I was expecting too much, or my old employer was actually really great. And so 3 to 6 months out, they're already thinking about coming back in. So another reason to highlight the value of these alumni programs and keeping those departed employees engaged.
Yeah, there was I want to say, I forget the exact number, but I think it was like 16% of people who left last year plan on going back. And so when you think about all these numbers about people quitting and not, there's part of it is the regret that maybe you shouldn't have left, but it's always good to see what's out there and appreciate what you had.
And then bring back some of that external information back into the organization potentially.
Absolutely. So another question, has anyone had any experience of business recruitment partner teams increasingly using alumni referral programs to build talent pools rather than to go external? And that might just be a question more for other managers to jump in and answer. But I do believe that the alumni program in general tends to be the talent pool. And so that's, I think, how people largely think about it.
Yeah, and that might be something that we can add a little bit more into next year's survey, is how that's being used to support some of that talent management.
Mm-hmm. Great. So there was one question here about LinkedIn groups for Alumni Network Program Managers. I think there are some, and if anyone's in them, please do share the links so everyone can join and get to know each other. Otherwise, we do have the 2 events that we talked about, so we'll get people together in person to meet others, and it's something that maybe we should even create if there isn't one dominant group. So would be great to have everyone just kind of chatting throughout the week and sharing our experiences and best practices.
One of the things that I've loved working with alumni program managers is how supportive this community is. People are willing to share their information. So thank you all for that.
Yes. Another question, when will PeoplePath include some dimension of mentoring services in the platform to avoid having to have, again, another platform? So mentoring is a question that we can chat about. I've seen more failures on mentoring than I have on success stories, but that could be a whole topic of a webinar in and of itself. But we do, for all of our clients who are on the call, we do have an upcoming product updates and roadmap review on August 11th. So if you have any product questions about PeoplePath in general, please sign up for that. And if you are someone who's even thinking about switching over to a new platform or creating a program, please email me and I'm happy to set you up with a demo and just going to show you what everything looks like. But mentoring can be a tricky business, and I'm always happy to talk more about it. And so maybe that's the future blog topic of some kind. And let's see, other questions. Yes, the slides will be shared after the call. We will share the recording of this video and the slides probably early next week once we get everything kind of cleaned up. And let's see. Having more information on alumni tracking assisted sales. So if you have any questions about any specific data in this report, please email both Becky and myself, and we'll be able to hopefully give you a cut of what you're looking for, as long as it's not kind of the whole report. But if there's a particular question, we can always dive in and kind of answer that for you. And let's see. Oh, there's Cape. So thank you, Graciela, for sharing that you could join that group. And I think we've reached the end of our questions, which is perfect because we have 1 minute left. So Becky, thank you so much for all of this insight and all this work. I truly love doing this whole project with you every year. We will start our next survey in March. So we've got another 6 months or so of this data being the most recent out there in the world of alumni. But again, if anyone has any ideas or questions, comments, concerns, things we want to dive deeper into, please email us now or 6 months from now, so we can start adding this into our benchmarking report. When it comes to your goals, everybody has different goals. So if you have more information on alumni assisted sales, business development, and more anecdotal stuff, please do share with us. That is usually one of the harder things for us to study and research. But for now, we focus on the HR stuff because it is just such a large goal for most of you, and it is what's happening out in the talent workforce. So with that, I will let all of you go on with your day. Thank you so much for attending. We will send out the recordings, and Becky, thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great day.